So maybe start with a short introduction then.
Sure, okay. Well, my name's Imran. I'm really happy to be here. I am the implementation trustee for the Open Banking Implementation Entity, which is a very, very long way of saying I'm responsible for building a single API standard that's going to be used by the 9 largest banks in the UK to meet all their PSD2 requirements.
Yeah. Jumping right in, I mean, you are one of the first markets being out with a sort of adopted framework on open banking. And without going through all the challenges with that, I thought that maybe we can more focus on, like, now when you're live, like, are there anything that surprised you these first months, or like what are the learnings from these? Like,
yeah, well, that's a great question. There were some lessons coming from the standard itself, and then some lessons for the implementation. So in terms of the first bit, obviously it needs to be a good standard. But what does good actually mean? Well, I think there were a couple of things that were really important to us for a good standard. One is that we wanted it to be quite tightly defined. We wanted it to be quite prescriptive. And that's important because I think if the standard is too open, you can end up with lots of different banks using a single standard, but the implementations all being very different. So you effectively have fragmentation within a standard. So we wanted to make it really tightly defined. Now that's hard.
At some point, we say that open banking is to foster innovation. And a lot of other people say that, the more you standardize it, the more it will sort of inhibit innovation and new ideas. But I mean, what are really the key benefits of the sort of implemented tight standard then?
Well, that's a really good point. So we don't think a tight standard is going to limit innovation. We think a tight standard is going to increase innovation. And the reason being that if you've got a simple provision of an API, that is the raw input into the innovation. The innovation sits on top of it. We don't think there needs to be a lot of innovation in the API standard. What does it need to do? It needs to be simple, secure, and provide the data in a clean way. We think that we will get more innovation if we've got hundreds of TPPs, hundreds of fintechs, consuming this raw data coming from a simple API, a little bit like Google Maps, and then the innovation can just sit on top of it. You can have a good standard or a bad standard. I don't think we got a bad standard, I think we got a good one. But you can have a good standard badly implemented and a good standard well implemented. And what we found is on the 13th of January is that even though we had a tightly defined standard, the implementations were quite varied. Some of it was technical implementations, and those are quite easy to fix, but they do take time. So elements of the security protocol had different interpretations, and we needed to get consensus around that, bring them all back into line again. We need to knock off some of the rough edges, there were defects and so on. 13th of January looked like an MVP for us. And that's why we created a whole kind of beta launch around it, so that we protected consumers and gave the banks a chance to fix all of those areas. But the other area of implementation is not the technical side, but it's the customer interface. And what we found is that the way that the banks communicate the proposition to their customers also needs to be very carefully managed.
Yeah. And what would you then say is sort of, in order for open banking to be a success, what will it take, or what is like the things needed to happen?
So I think passionately that there is a lot more than just a standard.
Yeah.
Right? This is our big learning. There is a lot required to get the implementation right. And I've talked about the kind of role that we play in policing the implementation, but there are assets that are required that don't just magically occur. We've got something called a directory, which we think is fundamental to ensure that only authorized entities can actually use open banking ecosystem. And we think that is fundamentally important to protect consumers. That is a non-trivial piece of kit, piece of technology to build. The good news is we've built it once in the UK, and I think we should be using it, leveraging it across different markets. The second thing is that we felt that the customers are not well served by the complaints process that currently exists. If you think about it, financial services is a very vertically integrated industry, and essentially a customer will deal with one entity, and if there's a complaint they'll go in here, and if it's not solved they'll go to the regulator. In an ecosystem, it's a completely different environment. Does the customer go to this party, this party, this party? If they go to the wrong party, does that party help them, or do they just tell them to go away? So we built a whole dispute management system, which is a workflow process that means if a customer goes to any party in the ecosystem, They have a voluntary responsibility to help that customer find the right place to go. And the customer won't have to give their complaint multiple times to different parties, and they can still go to the regulator at the end.
And has that sort of been tested yet? I mean, it's available, but aren't people going through the process?
Do you know what? It's been tested in the sense that all of my 9 largest banks have signed up to it. All the fintechs that are currently live in the ecosystem, which is not that many because they're getting through the FCA authorization process, they've all signed up to it. So everyone's got it implemented. Has it been tested with any real customer complaints? Not yet. So which is a kind of a good thing as well.
You don't want people to end up there, but I can imagine that as soon as the volumes increases, people will end up there, and then you will actually see how it works.
It will happen, but we're actually confident. We have scenario tested it and war gamed this many times already. I think we've got 65 things that could possibly go wrong, and we've tried to cater for all of them. Really, the objective for us in the UK is that when a fintech comes into the environment, in 2 minutes, they can connect with all the banks in the ecosystem.
It's only been one day here at Money 2020, and I've already heard the word like platform openness and collaboration mentioned in probably every other speech.
Yep.
I mean, if we look like 2, 3, or maybe 5 years down the line, where do you think, like what's next for open banking then, or where?
So I think we need to prove to the world that it works in a safe and secure way on access to accounts, so the PSD2 products, credit cards, prepaids, e-wallets. We need to demonstrate that customers actually want to use it as well, and for that, personally, I also need the fintechs to come in and develop exciting, innovative products they can take to the customers. Once we do that, politically, they will see that there is a need and there is a way of making it happen. Because everyone agrees with the fundamental principles. The data belongs to the consumer and not to the organization. Then I think we're going to start looking very much at other products, mortgages, savings accounts, then other products outside of banking, insurance and so on. And if the UK is anything to go by, we're already having discussions about water, energy, telco, broadband, utilities, the whole gamut.
Anyway, I guess we're running out of time. Nice having you here, and thank you for your time.
Not at all. Nice to meet you.